OBJ on the way. On this episode of Locked On Colts, we discuss some of the hottest Colts free agent rumors still out there, including 3 receivers who were once perennial Pro Bowlers. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Colts fans, thanks so much for tuning in and making us your number one listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Jake Arthur, joined as always by my partner Zach Hicks, and today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today, Zach and I want to tackle some of the latest rumors surrounding the Colts and a few free agents in particular, most of which happen to be wide receivers with big names. Odell Beckham Jr., Julio Jones, and T.Y Hilton. Receiver is the biggest question mark on the Colts offense, so it makes sense. Zach, let's go ahead and start with Beckham because I think we both believe it's the least likely scenario, but perhaps the most rewarding in the end. The Colts are always linked to notable free agents because they tend to have plenty of salary cap space, but it's actually OBJ's social media posts recently that have been kind of stoking this fire. Back in March, when the Colts traded for Matt Ryan, Beckham tweeted out, kind of paraphrasing here, random thought, but I really think Matt Ryan to the Colts was actually fire. I think he's going to elevate them to do something special over there. And then, of course, tons of Colts fans are like, hey, man, you should come be part of that. And then, of course, a couple weeks ago, he posted a picture of his son, and his son appears to be wearing what might be a Colts shirt. Of course, you can't tell, but just kind of I can't believe we're getting this much into it. But based on the stripes on the sleeves and the font on there, it kind of looks like a Colts shirt. You know, pairing that with the Matt Ryan tweet, everyone was like, all right, OBJ really wants to be with the Colts, which that's probably reading a lot into it. But I mean, Zach, he's a good player, but what do you think about all this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know we're kind of in the dead part of the offseason, but I think we're going a little much into the, because it's not like Odell Beckham Jr. like tweets like once every like 6 months, and they were both about the Colts or like both about like, he's a guy who's on Twitter a bit, he's on Instagram quite a bit, and I think the tweet was just him being like, "Oh, cool, Matt Ryan." Like, I don't know. Thought it was just
being a fan like the rest of us, basically.
Yeah. And then the Instagram post. If you guys are on YouTube here, you can kind of see it a little bit. And I'm sure if you guys are listening, you kind of know exactly what I'm talking about because Colts Reddit was going crazy about it. I know Colts Twitter was going a little crazy about it. I think this is one of the biggest stretches ever. like don't get me wrong, when I first saw this I was like, okay, yeah, it looks like a Colts jersey. I don't know, but like it just looks like a football t-shirt. Like it could be like a throwback, like a throwback Giants type thing. Like it could be I don't know, I don't think the Rams ever had anything like that, but it looks like it's the number that he wore with the Rams. So I don't know. I think it's a stretch to dive into. I know everyone wants to read the tea leaves on things and stuff, but I think it's absurd every time that people want to look for meaning in, especially wide receiver tweets and stuff. What was that dude? The fantasy football guy who said the quarterbacks like God
Carter,
bless my teammates. Yeah, God bless my teammates. Running backs are like everything's great. Wide receivers are like the enemy is near or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
all these real weird cryptic tweets.
Yeah. Wide receiver tweets are either cryptic or they're just out there with no real meaning. So like to really think that the Colts have interest or he has interest in the Colts because of some social media post, I think it's a little absurd. But I do love Odell Beckham Jr. Like I think he's a really good player. So I wouldn't mind the Colts signing him. It's just I wouldn't read too much into the social media stuff. It's great for clicks on Twitter and Reddit and stuff like that, though. I do completely agree
or
with
YouTube
that.
videos. I don't know.
Or YouTube videos, with a thumbnail or
right.
stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, besides that, I love the hypothetical of talking Odell Beckham Jr. to the Colts, but I wouldn't go too much off the social media post for it.
Yeah, and guys, normally this isn't something Zach and I would talk too much about because obviously, I mean, you're kind of getting the gist here that we don't think it's super realistic. There are other realistic options, but he's probably not one of them, just mutually from the team side and him, to be honest. But we'll entertain this real quick. I'll kind of, fly through some pros and cons of it.
Right. Like, here's what we'll do. We'll put our
Yeah.
stuff out there, how we feel about the subject and what we think of it, and then we'll be done with it. Okay. We'll be done with the free agent stuff after today. We're done with the free agent stuff. We're done with the with the DMs where it's like, what do you think about this? This is our stance on it. We're putting it out there, and we're good after that.
Yeah, and it's of course important for us to mention it because it's something we both get asked about a lot. But when you're talking about OBJ, you kind of have to start with the injuries. And I'm not trying to knock on the guy because I'll be honest with you, he's outside of being a Colts, not being a Colts player, he's been one of my absolute favorite NFL players since he came into the league. Like I love OBJ. I mistakenly forgot to wear my OBJ shirt today, actually. So I love the guy, but we have to talk about injuries first. He tore his ACL, of course, in the Super Bowl. So that's February. I think what I most recently read was he's expected to be back around November. I think he tore that same ACL back in 2020 when he was with the Browns. He had a broken ankle that cost him 2017. For the most part, since 2017 and that ankle break, his career's been really disrupted by injuries. He's only played a full season twice in 8 years, but his career got off to an unmatched start. In his first 3 years, 2014 to 16, he averaged 96 catches for 1,374 yards and 11.7 touchdowns per season for first 3 seasons. Like, they were consistent. He didn't just have one season that was like a huge outlier. Those are really consistent numbers, just unmatched, really. And when he's on the field still, he's pretty good. He was probably on his way to being the Super Bowl MVP before he tore his ACL, honestly. He's probably still a top 20 receiver. He's probably not a top 5 guy he once was, but I'd feel fine saying he's probably a top 20 guy still. Still very good route runner. He's got speed. His hands are really, top notch. So there's not much not to like there as a player. You're just kind of worrying about cost and injuries when you get a guy like that.
Yeah. And before we move out of this segment here, the one thing I want to say about OBJ with the Colts is, like, if you were to tell me, like, okay, injuries are a concern, but you would at least get him to start the year, you'd get him in camp, I'd be like, okay, maybe take a shot. Like when we talk about Julio Jones here next, I could see taking a shot on that, because even though the injuries might happen, you at least kind of get him a little bit in the offseason. You get him a little bit to start the year. With OBJ, I mean, you're going to be throwing him into a completely new system, a new team, and then he won't even play till halfway through the year. And who knows by then, maybe by then, we always talk about this, like, hopefully, but maybe Paris Campbell's playing well and playing a lot at that point. Maybe Alec Pierce looks like a really good rookie for you. Like, it's hard to just kind of grab a veteran and be like, okay, you'll be back in 7-8 weeks and on a completely new team, when a lot of things could change from the end of the offseason to that point. So I don't really think that signing makes sense for the Colts unless he were to be healthy for week 1, but it looks like there's no chance that that's going to happen. So I think we've said everything that we need to say about OBJ here. We finally climbed that OBJ mountain. We'll talk about a few more realistic options in Julio Jones and obviously in T.Y. Hilton. But first, let's talk about some bets. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Now, again, I'm going to bring up the same bet that I keep bringing up because, 1, I think it's a great bet for you guys to make, and 2, I forgot to look up a new bet before this one. So we are going to talk about Matt Ryan's passing yards again, 3,850.5 yards right now on BetOnline. Make some free money, bet the over. He is 100% going to hit over that this year. So
Yeah.
go to BetOnline today, bet the over on Matt Ryan's passing yards. Head to the website today and use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting today, July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odd makers at BetOnline. Again, beginning today on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. There's a couple Colts in it, so definitely check that out. You'll get to hear what Zach and I think about those selections in there. All right, so we've discussed the possibility of OBJ becoming a Colt, but how about another former superstar receiver in Julio Jones? He, of course, played for a decade with new Colts quarterback Matt Ryan and would be a decent complement atop the depth chart opposite Michael Pittman Jr. However, he's also been injured the last 2 years. He's missed a combined 14 games in those 2 seasons. Had a real nagging hamstring injury last year, particularly with the Titans. And he hasn't really necessarily looked like the Julio Jones we know when he's on the field. Now, personally, I think a bit of that is just receivers don't consistently flourish with the Titans. That's just not really their offense. Even A.J. Brown didn't always look like the guy we know he can be.
Right.
But yeah, unfortunately for him, he was just not on an offense that really showcased what a guy like Julio Jones can be. And he put up the worst numbers of his career, partly because of that and obviously the injuries. He might have more left in the tank than we know. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, I think even though it feels a little bit like fan fiction at this point, because all offseason everyone's been like, oh, Julio to the Colts. It makes so much sense. They don't have many receivers, and Matt Ryan's there. And I think he has like the same agent as Matt Ryan, or has the same agent as somebody big with the Colts too. I know I looked at that early in the offseason. So I don't know if that's ever going to happen or if it's anything the Colts will ever like actually pursue. But for me, it just makes a ton of sense. I mean, your receiver group right now, as much as we like those top 4 guys and we're interested in those top 4 guys, there's only one you can really count on, and that's Michael Pittman Jr. You know that he's going to get his yards. You know he's going to get his catches and stuff like that. But besides that, you don't know anything about this wide receiver group. So I think a guy like Julio Jones, even if you're only going to get 7, 8, 9, 10 games, I think that's better than not having him for those 7, 8, 9, 10 games. I mean, because you look at his stats last year, even in, like you said, that Titans offense where it's not the easiest one for receivers, especially for receivers who aren't amazing after the catch. I mean, A.J. Brown was able to produce because he creates so many yards after the catch. I'm not saying Julio is bad after the catch, but he's not what he was when he was, 25, 26.
Yeah.
So I think if you get him into a situation with the Colts, with a quarterback he knows, with an offense where he's going to be open all the time because of Frank Reich, and he's going to be able to find the intermediate stuff. And again, last year he was really solid when he played. It's just when he played was the big thing. So I'm all for it. I think, it doesn't hurt to kick the tires, even though I think he'll probably get more interest from a team like the Packers or someone a little bit later here in the offseason. Yeah. But I don't see the downside of pursuing Julio Jones. Again, it might just be us being fans and our fan fiction here trying to manifest it to the Colts. But I just think the reunion between him and Matt Ryan makes so much sense this next season.
Yeah, honestly, 10 years ago, this kind of stuff seemed a lot more unrealistic for the Colts, the fan fiction stuff. But the Colts kind of have been fan fiction in the last few years. Like, you would have never thought that Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan would be starting for the Colts within like 4 years. Like, that would sound insane to anybody. See, this team, I mean, it seems like they'll go make a move if it's there to be made. I kind of wonder if their biggest curiosity about Jones is like whether or not athletically he's cooked, because he's getting at that age. He's above 30 now, I'm pretty sure. He's dealt with the injuries, and he was a good all around receiver. Don't get me wrong, but what made him special was that athleticism and being more athletic than the guy he was lining up against every single play.
Right.
What does that look like now? Financially, I mean, it's a 1-year deal wherever he's going. I would have to imagine, and probably anywhere from $6 to $10 million. I would think. I don't see anyone handing him anything north of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was kind of doing research for this today, someone made a good point. I was reading, he's getting paid by the Falcons and the Titans already this coming season. So like, he may not command a huge contract because he's already getting money from 2 other teams. So the Colts could probably make it happen financially. If they're going to sign one of these veteran receivers, I definitely think it would be a Julio Jones or the next guy we're going to talk about, T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. of course, he's the guy who's been the franchise's leading receiver for the last decade. He's kind of been in a similar boat as Jones. Now he's struggled with injuries the last like 3 or 4 years, but the last 2 years especially has not really been able to stay on the field. Personally, when he was playing last year, though, I thought he looked fine. He didn't look like 2013, 2014 T.Y. Hilton, but I thought he looked fine. I just didn't think he meshed very well with Carson Wentz.
No,
which
outside of Michael Pittman Jr.,
right.
It was really just Michael Pittman.
Sorry to the guy who left that review. But no, I mean, surprisingly, I did think those two would work quite well together. It's just the accuracy thing. But no, I thought T.Y. looked perfectly fine when he was on the field last year. Like he could still offer something. He could still stretch the field a bit. He's probably not going to run after the catch much more at all. But I mean, he could do his job, and I think he could work pretty well with Matt Ryan. I'm sure you've done quite a bit of film stuff involving T.Y. so far. So what do you think on that?
Yeah, no, I don't think I think we're going into year 3 now where he's not T.Y. Hilton anymore.
Right.
It's obvious too. He's not what we saw.
He's end of career Marvin Harrison for those. It's kind of the transition from Marvin Harrison handing the baton to Reggie Wayne, and now it's Hilton to Pittman. That's kind of exactly what we're seeing now.
Yeah. He's not what he was, but he's still a really good player. A good route runner, knows how to separate. He can win deep. It's just not going to be his forte anymore. And I think we've seen a lot these last 2 years in the games that he has played that he can win over the middle. He can win on the outside with his route running and his foot quickness. I think he can do a lot of those things for our team. So when it comes to this next season, I'd rather see Alec Pierce get a shot. I'd rather see Paris Campbell get a shot than Hilton again. But as long as Hilton is willing to take that kind of lesser role or maybe a snap decrease in the games that he does play, I'm all great with bringing him back. It's T.Y. Hilton we're talking about here. The epitome of a great teammate, a locker room guy that everybody loves, and one of the greatest receivers in the history of this team. And they also got to get him to the 10,000 yards too. So there's a lot of reasons to bring him back, along with a really smart quarterback like Matt Ryan, who can kind of get him the ball a little bit more. I really am all for bringing back T.Y. Hilton as long as it doesn't take away that playing time from Paris Campbell, from Alec Pierce, because I want to see those two guys at least get their chance to shine instead of, having all the targets go to T.Y. Hilton. But I don't think that would be the case. I think, again, T.Y. Hilton, I think he understands where he's at this point of his career. And you've seen him these last couple of years take on more of that leadership veteran receiver role with the team. There's a lot of stuff behind closed doors. What he's doing for this wide receiver room the last few years has been great. So as long as that's kind of what the role would be, I'm all for bringing back T.Y. Hilton again.
Yeah, and I was actually asked about this in a piece I did this weekend. Over the weekend, I did kind of a mailbag thing. I was asked about Jones and Hilton. And for both things, just kind of boiling it down, it kind of came down to if they were going to do it, why haven't they done it yet? So that's kind of leaning into maybe they don't make either of these moves. But at the same time, they really do like these young receivers, and they think that a quarterback like Matt Ryan is going to give them the opportunity to really see what these receivers can do. So they'll be able to get an honest evaluation on them and get, they can get a lion's share of the snaps behind Pittman. But, they do kind of have these fallback options, most notably Hilton. That's a call they can make in a second. And, Jim Irsay would be like, the money is whatever, just do it. That's what happened last year at the deadline, essentially. But no, if things aren't going well with the young receivers behind Pittman, or God forbid someone who they really want to rely on gets hurt, make the call, bring him in.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, you got to worry about injuries, this and that. So you don't put too many eggs in that basket. But you pointed to another thing that was my main point was whether or not he'd be willing to accept the lesser role, because they do want to see those younger guys and lesser money. And the money's probably not a factor because it's been well documented by now that he turned down like a lot more money from Baltimore last year to come back to Indy. And another thing, the last point I'll make about it is I'm curious how much of a draw Reggie Wayne being the new wide receivers coach is, because that was T.Y.'s mentor. And I thought T.Y. would have already been back by now because of that, or at least as a big part of it. So,
yeah, I think,
I don't know.
Again, last thing, I know we're running this segment a little long, but I think what it comes down to is the Colts wanting to see these young guys and see if there's a need to bring back Hilton. I think that's really what it is ultimately. You know, if Ashton Doolin looks like he could take on an actual role this year, is Alec Pierce ready in year one? Is Paris Campbell going to stay healthy? I think they want to see those things first before they go to their fallback option, which is T.Y. Hilton.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just hit the nail on the head with that. Now we're done talking about the former star receivers, and we'll get into one or a few NFL free agents that either of us would like to see the Colts sign still. Of course, we're about a week and a half out from from training camp, so little wiggle room there if the team wants to get someone in there before that starts. But first, let's talk about our boy Dave, Zach. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Trust me, I've got a dog that practically lives at the vet, and she will not, for the life of her, get a job to help us out.
You've tried to convince her.
Yeah, she just will not do it. An unexpected $400 here and there is not great. But for people like us, Dave can help us get out of a pinch when we really need it. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, catch up on bills, or help your dog that just is constantly in the vet like me. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief that they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. All right, guys. Training camp starts next week, and the free agent wheels turn much slower this time of year. But there are still some appealing names out there that the Colts could sign. For me, I know I just said they were appealing, but I kind of had to force myself into picking somebody just because the roster is okay enough, and there's none of these guys that just really scream sign me. So pretty much all offseason, even after the Colts traded for Yannick Ngakoue, I thought they needed one more veteran pass rusher just as a backup, not a starter, but just someone in the rotation who can get you a handful of sacks on the season. And then they signed Ifeadi Odenigbo. That move was perfectly fine for me, but there's still another upgrade out there to be made, and that's defensive end Trey Flowers, formerly of the New England Patriots and Detroit Lions. Flowers is still out there because he, too, has struggled with injuries the last 2 years, which explains pretty much why a lot of these notable veterans are still out there as previous injuries. He had a broken arm and then a knee injury that cost him 19 games since 2020. However, he is productive when he's healthy. In his 4 healthy seasons in the NFL, he averages 7 sacks, 8.3 tackles for loss, and 20 quarterback hits on the season. It's not star numbers, but that's really quality, consistent stuff. You're basically looking at a better Al-Qadim Muhammad, essentially, a guy who can be a decent run stopper and get you a handful of sacks. But, obviously probably a little more expensive. Zach, Who did you come up with?
Nothing great. Nothing great.
Exactly.
I mean, outside of Julio and T.Y., there's not really any free agents where I'm like, okay, the Colts should at least inquire. They should really go into. But I kind of highlighted 4 positions that I guess the Colts could add more talent there. That's not receiver, obviously. So
yeah,
number 1 was corner. I think corner. We've talked a lot about the top 4 guys at corner, but their 5th corner again is what Anthony Chesley versus Marvell Tell versus Tony Brown. Yeah. So it's you could probably upgrade that a little bit. So I wrote down Mackenzie Alexander, former, I think, top 15 pick for the Vikings or top 10 pick for the Vikings. Maybe he was in the 20s. I know that was years ago when I was scouting the draft with him. But
good Clemson corner.
Yeah, good Clemson corner, feisty guy who's a good tackler, can play some slot, play some outside. I know that he had some personal issues which had him step away from the Bengals in the past. But if all that's good, everything checks out, I think he'd be an interesting guy, especially as your cornerback 5. It would definitely be an upgrade over those guys that we just listed that the Colts currently have. I think interior offensive line could maybe use an upgrade. So I threw down Nick Martin, the former Notre Dame center who played for the Texans, got a big deal from the Texans, and then was cut, I think, 2 years ago. I think he spent last year with the Raiders. Solid player. He's still out there because his play has definitely dropped off over the last couple of years. But
another injured guy. I always thought he was okay when he was with Houston, but just couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah, and again, they don't really have a backup center right now on the roster. They want Will Fries doing it. I know they have Danny Pinter still kind of doing some snapping and stuff like that. So that's something. I guess. Edge player as well. I put down Benson Mayowa, a veteran guy who's had a lot of success in the NFL. Played in a 4-3 scheme with the Seahawks. The same type of Gus Bradley type of 4-3. He had a down year last year. I think he only had 1 sack, and I think it came in week 1. But I liked him over the last couple of years.
I've had Mayowa on like every one of my free agent big board or like Colts should look at this guy list over the last couple of years. Cheap pass rush option. There's not much downside with it.
Yeah, and he can, if you're really set on getting rid of Ben Banigou for whatever reason, or he just doesn't look the way that you want him to in camp, there's a good backup Leo right there. So, Benson Mayowa maybe. And then the one I actually went with for my choice, I know I just read off a couple names, but was Darius Philon, the defensive tackle, defensive end, who played last year with Vegas under Gus Bradley, and then obviously played under Gus Bradley with the Chargers as well. He has had some off-field issues, so that's definitely something. That's probably why, he's still out there right now. But if you're looking for a talented pass rusher, a guy who has experience with Gus Bradley, and this interior defensive line right now, it's DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, and then a bunch of rookies. That's the whole interior defensive line. So if you want to add another veteran, like the Colts did last year, they added Antoine Woods, I think is what it was, early in August. Mm-hmm. If they want to do something like that again, Darius Philon makes a lot of sense. But, outside of these guys, I mean, honestly, I'm not even here saying that they need to sign these guys. It's, I feel good about the roster right now.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think Philon, if I remember correctly, had a pretty good game against the Colts when he was with the Raiders.
Players did.
Yeah.
Most of the Raiders players did.
I will say one guy that kind of hit my cutting room floor, and it's someone I've never wanted the Colts to touch just because, again, every guy I've mentioned gets injured, but Will Fuller. They could use a field stretcher like that. I think Matt Ryan could work well with him. But the dude, I don't think he has ever played a full season. And, he had the PED suspension last year. He probably would be more expensive than what would be worth for the price. But it came down to Fuller and Flowers for me.
Beautiful,
but guys,
list. Beautiful list. We love it.
That really shows you right there what you're looking at on the free agent market. The Colts are probably best to just chill out and hang tight until preseason roster cuts come and they make their waiver claims. They always turn up someone good at that time of year.
Yeah.
All right, pals. I think that is it for us today. Locked On Colts will be back with you tomorrow as we discuss Vegas's statistical projections for the Colts triplets on offense. That's Matt Ryan, Jonathan Taylor, and Michael Pittman Jr. Fair, unfair, ridiculous? We'll tell you.
And guys, go follow us on social media at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter, at Jake Arthur NFL. If you're on YouTube, you can see those right there. And again, subscribe to us on YouTube. We are on YouTube. We're up to 300 subscribers, guys. You guys are killing it on the YouTube side. And also, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, whatever, rate, review, get all that stuff. Get it so we are really your first listen every single day. But we appreciate you guys for all the support so far. We're in the early days of this. And now we're at 5 days a week. So you guys are going to get even more content from us. Make sure you're subscribed to us on all platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, guys, for making Locked On Colts your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. That's our national NFL experts and insiders keeping you fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because we know an offseason doesn't equal breaking the action. We'll see you guys tomorrow.